That's where you'll see the information about the venous access port. Kind of right in the middle of that page, it gives you an example of one. So that first code is for the catheter that they've hooked up to the port or to the vascular access device, and then remember we code it to its final place. Remember, so they coded it to insertion of an infusion device into the superior vena cava. So you'll have to look and see where it stops, but that's where you're going to code it to. And then the insertion of the vascular access device, remember, usually in the chest, but you got to go subcutaneous tissue and fascia, and then to the chest. Or abdomen, but I think usually you're going to see chest. Okay, again, that is just the catheter placement. So again, you're going to have a code for dialysis. And that's going to code out to performance. The root operation is performance. It's out of the section extracorporeal assistance and performance. Remember, performance means it's taken over the function. So when we send that blood out, it's taking over the function of your kidney. Okay, so performance, and that's codes out to those 5A codes. 5A1, those are the ones we just looked at. Multiple is D60Z, single is D00Z. The top of the page, it's telling you that sometimes the admission is simply to put in the catheter or the vascular access device, and they don't start the dialysis. Okay, well, you're still going to code probably it's going to be the chronic kidney disease that brought them in. You're going to show that they are dependent on dialysis, that Z99.2, and then you would code the procedure for inserting the cath or inserting the vascular access device, but no code for dialysis. Of course, if they start the dialysis, then you would add the additional code to show they're getting dialysis. Okay, so really that's not much different, just whether or not you have that extra procedure code if they got it.
So if they don't start it yet, you still do the Z99?
Yep, because
they're about to.
Yeah, because they're going to be dependent on it. Yeah, I know. Why don't we just wait? Okay, and then they talk to you again about the admission for fitting or adjustment. So the example they give you below that one is to clean the catheter. We already talked about those codes. Those are the Z49 codes. Z4901 for hemodialysis and O2 for peritoneal. So again, you'd have those. Then you'd have your kidney condition. Then your dependence on dialysis. And then depending on whether or not they got dialysis, as an additional procedure code. The next one they talk about is when they make an arteriovenous graft. And that's where they're actually going to use a device, a tubular device, to hook the artery to the vein. Okay? And that's a bypass. Okay? They're making a new route for the fluid. And it tells you in here that usually the blood flows from the artery to the vein. Okay? So your body part's going to be the artery because that's where it's starting. Your qualifier is going to be the vein, and the device is going to be a synthetic substitute. And then you'll have to look at the approach. In this particular scenario they gave you, they used an open approach. So this is one where we're using a device to hook the artery to the vein. And then the next one is an arteriovenous fistula, and that's where there's no device used. They just actually hook the artery to the vein. Okay, so that is still a bypass. We're still changing the flow or the route. Your body part is still the artery because it flows from the artery to the vein. Qualifier is the vein. Only this time you don't have a device, right? It's just hooked together. They tell you in here that it takes about 2 to 3 months for those arteriovenous fistulas to mature before they can actually use them as a site, an access site. And so then they talk about what happens if that doesn't mature. If you have a non-maturing AV fistula, then that codes out as a mechanical complication. That codes out to T82590. And the way they treat those, they can do an arteriovenostomy, which basically just means they're making a new creation between the artery and the vein. Or they can do a balloon angioplasty, go in there and try and open that up wider so that the flow works. Or they can revise the AV fistula, which a lot of times when they're doing that, they're closing off the competing veins, which is usually what the problem is. And then they just give you a whole bunch more codes for other mechanical complications, such as breakdown, displacement, or leakage. Those are the T82 codes. T82 510 for breakdown, 520 for displacement, and 530 for leakage. And then they give you mechanical complication of a vascular dialysis catheter. So not the fistula, just a catheter, and that's T82.4. At the top of the next page, it's talking about cystostomy and complications of that. So that's where they're bringing, they're making an opening from the bladder to the outside of the skin, and this is where something goes wrong. So we have our same general characters at play here. These are all going to code out to N99.51. A 1-1 is going to be for an infection. Remember, with an infection, you're generally going to have 2 additional codes, right? One for the type of infection, such as cellulitis, abscess, whatever. And then the second code will be for the organism. So 3 codes. Complication, infection, type of infection, organism. And then 512 is going to be mechanical. Those are your malfunctions. And then 518 is other. Remember, other is nothing's wrong with the device, but the patient's reacting. So that'll be things like they developed a fistula, they have a hernia, they have a prolapse, those kinds of things. So those are our usual, right? Infection, mechanical, and other. It's just that they've moved this from the complication chapter to the genitourinary because it's specific to that body system. Then it also gives you the code for mechanical complication of an indwelling urinary catheter. That codes back to the complication system. So that's T83.0. And then down at the bottom of the page, it's talking about cystoscopy as an operative approach. That's not really a problem anymore. But in 9, the question was, are you going to code cystoscopy if that was the approach, because a lot of the codes didn't show that, And they were telling us no, that that's a very common way for them to get in there to do urinary tract procedures. So you don't need to assign an additional code. But in 10, it doesn't make any difference because we show it through the approach. So it doesn't matter. It's going to be there. So we don't have to worry about it. But it's not an additional code. It's just in the code as the approach. Transurethral, that just means they're going through a natural or artificial opening, going through the urethra. Okay, so that's not necessarily endoscopic. You would have to see that it said endoscopic before you went via natural opening or artificial endoscopic. And that's the next example they give you, which is like transurethral ureteroscopy. Now you've got the scope in there. But just because you see transurethral doesn't mean there's a scope. So watch for that. And then lastly, it's talking about, okay, what if you do a cystoscopy, you look around in there, you don't find anything, you don't do any other procedure, then remember how that codes out? What's our root operation there? Inspection. Okay, so that's a possibility. All right, let's try code number 2. On page 268.